If you guys want to add something, just throw it in the chat. Liv will be paying attention to the chat and answering you guys or intervening if there's something you guys want to yeah to add. And if we find the gaps, we are of course inviting you guys to speak as well.
Right, I think I'm live.
Can you share the stream link so people join?
Yeah, I'll message you.
All right, thank you.
Right, that should be working.
Sounds good. I'll share. There is a chat button here on stage, everyone, so I'll share the link there. All right, sounds good, Meta. I can see your screen now.
Yeah, I think I'm ready. Yeah, everything's ready.
Perfect. So if I may suggest, we do have some time constraint with Wave. So can we start with the unholy questions first?
Yeah. You want me to read them out, or do you want to?
Yeah, please feel free to ask away.
We'll take it turns.
Yeah, that works for me. I've got the document as well, so I can follow along.
Obviously, the first thing is to cover all the essential, the basic, boring stuff that people want to know straight away when they start playing Death Knight for the first time. Best race, talents, what are the best specs, stuff like that.
Yeah, I can. I'll start with that. So, the best race by far, and I'm sorry to all of our alliance friends here, but it's Orc, and it's not even close. So, Orc is the best because you not only get the attack power racial bonus, um, but most importantly, you get the plus 5% to your pet damage. And your pet becomes way more important in Cataclysm versus back in Wrath. So Orc ends up being absolutely the best. If you're playing Horde, you should be playing Orc for Unholy. And yeah, Liv has put this in the chat. It's basically Orc and then Troll. Troll's still pretty good with the Berserking. We'll get to Gary, the Gargoyle, in a little while, but the Berserking does help your Ghoul quite a bit. And then, yeah, Warg and Draenei. And Blood Elf is actually, for those of you who like the aesthetic of the Blood Elf is actually not worthless in Cataclysm like they were in Wrath, because Blood Elf gets a RP racial. Um, so you can, it's very helpful in the beginning of the fight. I think it's, correct me if I'm wrong, Liv, but I think it's 15 RP that you get. So it just kind of starts you out with some RP. Obviously, not anywhere near as good as the other races, but it's better than Tauren, Undead, all of that stuff. And then Goblin, Goblin and Worgen both have 1% haste and 1% crit, respectively, which is okay. And then, of course, they have some extra stuff like their boosts. And then finally, Draenei gets the 1% hit. They're not as great anymore just because they don't benefit your party. That 1% is now a personal thing, but it's still pretty useful. And then the rest of the races don't have any benefit.
You can only imagine it's less painful once we do have access to reforging right now, right? It was somewhat of a problem back in Wrath, that 1%. But yeah, with reforge, it's less critical.
Yeah, and then Liv said Worgen is better because of the 2 minute sprint racial, which is, it's like an extra nitro boost that doesn't fail on you, essentially, which is nice. In terms of talents, then, I mean, I don't know if we want to share a screen or I can just kind of. Did you want me to walk through the talents real quick?
It'd probably be faster if you shared your screen, actually.
Okay, yeah, I can do that. Here, let me pull that up real quick. Way too many screens. Okay, hopefully you can see this. I'll just bring over the talent calculator for from WoW Sims. So this is kind of your typical rating spec if you're rating heroic. And I'll just start with the unholy and walk down and then talk about the different points that you can kind of move around. So this first row, virulence and epidemic, those are non-negotiable. You get an extra 12 seconds for your diseases, extra 30% damage for your diseases. Your diseases are a big part of Unholy, more so than for Frost. This Unholy Command talent is just a filler talent. You could put it there. You could put it under Resilient Infection. It doesn't really matter because you definitely get Morbidity, which increases Death and Decay and Death Coil. But you need to get to this third row, and that's why you need an extra point. Along the third row, you've got Shadow Infusion, which I'll return to that. But you get Contagion. The thing with Contagion that people don't understand, and so let me address some questions that I get a lot. Contagion says increases the damage of your diseases spread on pestilence by 100%. So what people think is that, oh, hey, if I spread my diseases, which snapshotting your diseases is a big part of Unholy, your diseases will snapshot your crit, strength or AP, attack power, and it will also snapshot any damage modifiers you have. So like percent damage modifiers. And when you pestilence, it also snapshots those buffs onto, all of the other mobs. The thing is, though, that a lot of people are under the assumption that this means, oh, after I have spread those diseases, I can then go to the other mob and spread them back. That's not how it works. What Contagion does is it takes your current buffs and spreads those buffs at 100% to the mobs around you currently. Without this talent, when you spread your diseases via via pestilence, it only spreads 50% of the damage. So yeah, thank you. So Liv has
Well, I didn't
posted
even know
this.
that.
Yeah, it's if you don't have this, then you're basically getting 50% of the disease's power onto the mob. So this just spreads 100% of that damage. But it's not snapshotting the damage on the mob, it's snapshotting your current buffs. So like if you have a strength proc and you pestilence, it will spread that strength proc. If that strength proc drops and you press pestilence again, you would spread without that strength proc, if that makes sense. So that's a question that we get almost on the daily, I feel like. So this next talent, Unholy Frenzy, this is one of our big cooldowns. So it increases our haste by 20%. Yes, you can put it on someone else. No, you should never do that. And no, you should not put it onto your pet. We do get that question a lot. Your pet will inherit your buffs. So if you put it on your pet would get it and you wouldn't. If you put it on yourself, both you and your pet get it. So always just use Unholy Frenzy on yourself. And you should also double dip it with Bloodlust, which I can mention later when we talk more about like the rotation. The Runic Corruption talent, this is one of our most important talents. It's a change from how the other Death Knights work. So Frost and Blood, when they do their Death Coil or their Rune Strike or their Frost Strike, Runic Empowerment will 45% of the time just refresh a rune that was depleted. But for us with this talent, instead, we get 3 seconds of 100% rune regeneration, which is incredible. It's one of the main reasons why we use Death Coil on a constant basis. And it's also the reason why you don't want to just you don't want to ignore your death coils. You want to constantly be death coiling and switching between using your runes and using your death coils, using your rune, like weaving them back and forth, because you want to constantly be fishing for runic corruption procs. So I'll return back to the shadow infusion in a second.
Just before you
And
move forward,
yeah,
just to mention to everyone, this is a core mechanic between all the specs, because as Frost, we are going to mention that on Frost as well. We do want to somewhat manage what runes you are refreshing, but as Unholy, you just get refresh speed with that proc, right? Instead of
Yes.
having a rune 100% refreshed, a random rune that is depleted 100% refreshed, we do have refresh speed to all the runes applied. And this does stack. We do have this question a lot too. So you don't have to spread out death coils. If you do have a bunch of death coils to send one after another, so you can fish for, uh, you know, dark transformation faster, you are indeed allowed to do that because they do stack. So if you do have one up on you and it's 3 seconds before it expires and then it procs again, it just sums up the 2 times.
yep. And this is a reason why I often kind of suggest to people, like, especially when you're trying to get your dark transformation off. You know what? I'm going to save this for when I talk about dark transformation.
All right.
I have a comment to make on that, but I'll get there in a second. But yes, it's important to realize that it does stack, which is awesome. So this next level, Rage of Rivendare, this just increases our damage of Scourge Strike, Festering Strike, Plague Strike. Scourge Strike is our main ability. That is our number one ability. It's the thing that brings the most damage, and this makes it even beefier. With magic suppression. So this is another thing that a lot of, especially new Death Knights, don't, or new Unholies rather, don't realize. So in Wrath of the Lich King, AMS gave you runic power when you used it. That's not true in Cataclysm unless you have this talent. So you'll notice if you actually read the talent, it says increases the spell damage absorption of your AMS by an additional 25% and increases the runic power generated when damage is absorbed. Without magic suppression, you don't generate runic power. So you need this talent if you want to get runic power. You don't need all 3 points. You only need 1 point, but then you get less runic power from the absorbed shell, essentially. So this talent makes AMS a DPS upgrade, a massive DPS upgrade for us. And it's also one of the things that can make a huge difference between an average unholy and an incredible unholy is learning how to use AMS very, very well. Yeah, exactly what Liv said. A very good DK knows how to milk every bit of RP from AMS. Exactly. So then moving on to this next row, Unholy Blight, same as in Wrath. It's just extra damage. It's 10% damage of your Death Coil, and it does stat. Or it works like Ignite, is how I've heard it described. So not necessarily that it stacks, but it works like Ignite does. Improved Unholy Presence grants you an additional 10% haste. This is awesome because for both Frost and Unholy, we stay an Unholy presence the entire time. So this is different from Wrath, obviously. And then AMZ. So AMZ does not work like it did in OG Cataclysm, and it doesn't work like it does on the private servers. AMZ, the way it essentially works is it doesn't do the calculation. Like if you read the tooltip, it says places this large stationary anti-magic zone that reduces spell damage that lasts for 10 seconds or until it absorbs all this stuff. And it doesn't do that calculation until like after all of the damage has hit. And so this is why you see so many unholy DKs in prog groups. And even though Unholy won't be as strong in Firelands as we are right now, for prog, you're still going to see tons of Unholy DKs. So for like Nefarian, you can use AMZ to basically soak and almost negate the crackle. That's not really necessary for normal, but for heroic, where it's doing 130,000 damage, this is huge. So having 4 unholy DKs is massive, or 3 when you're doing prog. So if you're in a heroic raiding group or a prog group, this is absolutely necessary. For Nefarian, it's useful for Omicron or Omnitron. I always call it Omicron like it's COVID. And for like Sinestra for the breaths. So moving on to Dark Transformation. So this is the big ability. This is one of the other huge changes in Cataclysm, is that we can transform our abomination or our ghoul into an abomination. And we do that by doing 5 death coils, which gives us 5 stacks of shadow infusion. And then once we get those, we can use an Unholy Room to transform our ghoul for 30 seconds. And this is the other thing that is a huge difference between an average DK and a really good DK is your uptime on Dark Transformation. So it kind of changes how we play. This is why you try to time out your AMS, because you can use AMS to get 5 stacks really quickly. As you're getting near the end of your Dark Transformation, you want to try to pool that RP a little bit more. You don't want to completely negate or, not use any death coils for like the last 10 seconds, but you want to be a little more cautious about how you're using your death coils as you get close to this dropping off. In addition, if you get a sudden doom proc, which we'll talk about in a second, in like the last 5 seconds before Dark Transformation drops, you want to hold on to that. So you're trying to maximize your RP as this is dropping off so that you can have the highest amount of uptime on your Dark Transformation. And that leads to a huge amount of DPS. And a lot of the decisions that you make with your trinkets and with different things, you're going to try to revolve around matching it up with your Dark Transformation. So I had mentioned earlier that Unholy Frenzy, your Dark Transformation or your ghoul benefits from your Unholy Frenzy. Well, you want to match up your Unholy Frenzy with your Dark Transformation. This is also true of Lust. So your transformed ghoul will double dip Lust, meaning that he will get Lust, but then he will also benefit from the Lust that you get. So essentially, he's getting double lusted, and then if you throw on the Unholy Frenzy, he's getting almost triple lusted. And the difference between so looking at the logs and the Warcraft, the DK analyzer, which will be released sometime this week. If you have just a normal Dark Transformation in kind of like, relative heroic gear, and you could even have a couple of procs doing about 200k. If you've got Lust and Unholy Frenzy, it jumps all the way up to about like 600k. So getting a fully lusted and unholy frenzied Dark Transformation is massive, massive difference in damage, which is why I have started stacking them. I always try to stack Unholy Frenzy with Lust because of how much damage that you get out of a fully lusted Dark Transformation. Fonzus, Betagoblin, if you guys want to jump in at any point.
No,
I know
no
I've been
worries.
talking a lot.
Well, you've
I can
smashed the
keep going
talents,
then.
haven't you? maybe explain the blood ones, and then we can move on.
Yeah, so I'll just finish up real quick with this top part. So Ebon Plaguebringer, very similar to how it was in Wrath, but a couple of changes. It still is spread to everything that has your disease damage, and it increases the damage taken from your diseases by 30%. So that's a difference from Wrath. Your Shadow Priests or any other diseases don't benefit from it. It's only your diseases. Sudden Doom is another one of our changes to Cataclysm. So this used to be a blood talent. It's now ours. Your main hand auto attacks have a chance to give you a free death coil, which is huge. Now, one question that we get a lot from DKs is, hey, can I play dual wield as Unholy? And the answer is absolutely not. And that's because Sudden Doom is only normalized to your main hand. So you're doing less damage with your Scourge Strikes, because that's your other main damage ability, and you're not getting more sudden dooms. So don't even think about playing dual wield Unholy. It's not a thing. Just stop if you are. And then Gary. I can talk about Gary a little bit later, so we can move through the rest of the talents. In terms of blood, you want bladed armor. That gives you extra attack power. Butchery gives you extra runic power in combat. And then you want to take 1 point in runic power mastery. The reason you want to do that is because let's see, which talent is it? The runic corruption talent reduces the cost of your death coil by 6. This makes death coil cost 34 RP. If you have 1 point in runic power mastery, this means with a full RP bar, you can do 3 successive death coils. Now, you don't necessarily want to do 3 successive death coils. You'll want to do 2 and then use a rune and then do another one. That's because you don't want to get multiple runic corruption procs and cap your runes. Capping your runes is about the worst thing you could possibly do. But that allows you to do roughly 3 in a row. And if you're not in a prog group, you can get rid of these 2 points and put them in improved blood tap. Or if you are running 2 unholy specs and you're on a boss that doesn't require an AMZ, you can put those 2 points over here and reduce the cooldown of your blood tap by 30 seconds. So yeah, that's the talents. The glyphs you can see right here. This is wrong. I don't know why that's there. It should be this one. Death Coil, Scourge Strike, Raise Dead. These are your major glyphs. And then your minor glyphs. This is also wrong. Thanks, Sims. You want to make sure you have Death's Embrace. The other 2 are optional.
Do you never like swap any for different fights?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there are a couple of fights, one in particular, where switching out Death Coil for Death and Decay is a decent alternative, and that's for Halphus. The Death and Decay glyph is different from in Wrath. Instead of increasing its damage, it increases its duration by 50%. So if you are going to use this glyph instead of Death Coil, you want to make sure that it's on an AoE fight, i.e. Halphus, and you want to make sure that all of the ads are going to survive in that Death and Decay for the full 15 seconds. Otherwise, it's not going to be a DPS upgrade. So for faster groups, it might not necessarily be an upgrade.
I guess we may as well move on to professions. What's the consensus on professions? Is it just crafting, engineering, end of story?
Not quite. So, and then I'll stop sharing. I don't really need to share in this next part. Or I guess I could switch it over to here. So the professions are engineering, absolutely. Engineering, you get Synapse Springs, which is a strength boost. You also get the Nitro boosts. And then you also get right here. You also get the high-powered bolt gun, which is useful on a couple of fights. So it's useful for AoE. It does about 11k damage in a small AoE range. And it's useful on Halphus and also for heroic Maloriak on the swills. So you get those benefits. In terms of the other professions, so right now, they're all pretty even. They all give 80 strength, with the exception of tailoring. Don't do tailoring. I'm not even going to talk about it. It's a waste. but all of the other ones give 80 strength in some way. Jewel crafting gives you 81 strength right now. However, in Dragon Soul, when we get the plus 50 gems versus the plus 40, jewel crafting actually becomes the worst profession because you're still getting the, if I show this over here, you're still getting these gems that give you plus 67, but the opportunity cost is that you're no longer you're not more, you're only 17 more than the rare gems. And so what it ends up being is that you're plus 51 strength versus all of the other professions. Blacksmithing, on the other hand, goes to plus 100 strength. So right now they're all pretty much even, but in Dragon Soul, jewel crafting only gives plus 51. The rest give plus 80. Blacksmithing gives you plus 100 because you get to socket those two epic gems giving you plus 50 and plus 50.
So, so you'll have to re-roll professions in Dragon Soul.
If you want to be Biss, then yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew this going in, so I actually re-rolled at the beginning. So I'm already blacksmithing. I would highly suggest people to just do it now because right now, at least on my server, the mats are a lot cheaper than, especially than they were at launch. But they're going to get way more expensive when we get to Dragon Soul. So
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, now is a good time to level up professions. Definitely, I just did it myself actually today, and it didn't cost me that much at all. About $2,000 to get my engineering maxed. So, next thing would obviously be stat priority and reforging.
Yeah, so reforging and stat priority. Actually, let me just. Sorry, I'll just share again. Probably. I can just use the. So yeah, stat priority. So number one is you want to go with strength. Strength is your number one stat, bar none. And this even goes to like gemming. So when you are gemming, you do not want to sacrifice like 10 strength for an extra 10 haste or something like that. Always just do the most strength possible. It's our best stat. It's our best stat for a number of reasons. One, we get an incredible amount of attack power from our strength. In fact, if I show you this, if I just go to the Unholy, I think I'm going to be able to see this under talents. Unholy has a boost to it that we get an extra, I think it's 25% boost to our strength. So whatever your strength is, when you switch to Unholy, you get an extra 25%. Or it might be 15%. I can't remember exactly the oh, Liv's gonna pull it up. Thanks, Liv. After strength, and then also our ghoul benefits from our strength. But they don't benefit from our attack power. After strength, then what we want is haste. After haste is crit currently, and then mastery. But of course, we want to make sure that we get our hit rating up to 8%. So really, it's strength to hit until you hit cap, which is 8% or 963, I believe. And then after hit cap, you go haste, crit, and mastery until you get Girthalak, which is the sword off of Deathwing, the madness of Deathwing. Then mastery becomes basically equal to crit. I could go more into that, but I don't have to.
Yeah, one thing I would recommend, guys, is just get the add-on. It's called Reforge Light Classic. Pretty much
Yep.
does everything for you, so you don't have to even think about it. I'm pretty sure, do the profiles in the add-on work perfectly? You can just trust them, or do you have to import your own from the WoW sim?
Yeah, they work perfectly. I see a lot of people in the DK Discord saying like, "Hey, I imported them from WoW Sims. It's telling me something different from Reforge Lite." Don't worry about that. Just use Reforge Lite. And there's two profiles in there. There's actually an unholy profile, and then there's an unholy Girthalak profile. Make sure that you pick the just regular unholy profile.
Yeah, it's pretty easy, guys. If you see on screen, all you do is you press this one button and that's it. And a way to know that it has worked, just in case you're unsure, is if how close you are to the hit cap. If you're just over the hit cap, then you know it's most likely worked. Right, so I guess now we need to get into the proper detailed and complicated things. I don't think we already know what consumes. We already know what consumes, isn't it? It's the strength trinket, the strength food. So I guess if you were, let's do it in a way where we were to explain it to someone who's very new to the class, like a very basic spell priority and a rotation, before we get to the more complicated stuff.
Yeah. So unholy is probably the second most difficult spec in Cataclysm. That would be my opinion. I think that opinion's backed up by a lot of people. The only thing I would say is the more difficult spec is Subtlety Rogue, which literally no one is playing because it is so difficult. Um, but what makes Unholy quite difficult and is the most important thing for a new player to understand is how to manage your resources. So we have RP, of course, and our runes. The big change to our rune system from Wrath to Cataclysm is that instead of having 6 individual runes, we now have 3 sets of 2, and they work with each other. So we have 2 blood, 2 unholy, 2 frost. When you use both runes, like both blood runes, they refresh one after another. So in Wrath, they would refresh at the same time. In Cataclysm, if you use 2, the first or the second one won't start refreshing until the first one is done refreshing. So it makes like kind of managing your runes a little bit easier. The other main difference though is that our rune refresh is affected by our haste, which is why we want to stack as much haste as possible. And so the more haste you have, the faster your recharge rate. This is why our runic corruption talent is so important, because it increases that rune regeneration rate by 100%. It's also why things like Unholy Frenzy and Lust really change up our play style, because when you have Lust and Unholy Frenzy, your runes are regenerating super fast. So managing your resources is all about trying to always keep enough runes and runic power to be able to always have an ability to hit. So you're using your death coils, your runic power on death coils, and primarily, I mean, we're forgetting about dark transformation for right now. You're trying to use your death coils to try to get runic corruption procs. When you get runic corruption procs, that gives you more runes to use. And so that's like the number one thing. And so when you're practicing on a dummy, the main thing you should start out with is just practicing with, okay, can I keep a flow going where I'm not running into this feast and famine? And what I mean by that is, oh no, I have capped my runes, and I have also capped my runic power. And so then if you cap your runes, then of course you're not regenning anything and you're just, losing out on that regen. You always want some runes to be regenning at any time. And you also don't want to cap your runic power. So for new Death Knights or new Unholies, I say get in front of the dummy and just practice trying to keep a flow going where you're not capping your runes and you're not capping your runic power. And that's like the hardest thing to really get down. In terms then of like what we actually do with our rotation, like what abilities are we actually trying to use? So I'm just going to pull up here on the Wowhead guide the class overview so I can talk about some of these abilities. So the main ability that we want to use is our Scourge Strike. Let's see if I can find something on here that shows that. Maybe not. Don't see it on here. Anyway, Scourge Strike is our main ability. It only takes one Unholy Rune. And we are trying to use that as much as possible. We have another ability called Festering Strike, which Festering Strike, this is a new, I get to actually show it this time. Festering Strike is a new ability we get in Cataclysm, and it does two things. So it uses a Frost and a Blood Rune. This is the main thing that we use our Frost and Blood Runes on. And it transforms that Frost and that Blood Rune into a Death Rune. And so what this basically means is that we have two Unholy Runes that we can use on Scourge Strike. And then if we use Festering Strike on our Blood and our Frost runes, this will give us Death Runes that we can then also use on Scourge Strike. And so that's kind of one of the main things that you're trying to do as you are playing is use your Unholy/Death runes on Scourge Strike and then convert your Blood and Frost runes to Death runes that you can then also use on Scourge Strike. Honestly, one of the biggest things that I would say, probably the biggest difference between a good Unholy player and an average Unholy player, while Dark Transformation is important, that we talked about a little earlier, it's the number of Scourge Strikes that I see people using. In general, you do not want to use a Death Rune on a Festering Strike. There's some nuances that we are not going to go into. We don't have enough time to go into those nuances. But in general, you want to save your Scourge Strikes or your Death Runes for a Scourge Strike. Now, the other abilities that we use, we still use...
Before you go forward, let me just increment like your answer there, because like people ask, should I prioritize Festering Strike so I can carry on my snapshot? This is a snapshot from the beginning of the fight throughout, I don't know, all the way up to 2 minutes, so you can have the next gap and the next the next procs, trinkets, etc., so you can snapshot again. We did run a lot of stems using that, and with the gear we have now, I cannot guarantee it will stay the same throughout the whole expansion, but with the gear we have now, it is not worth it, right? So you do keep Festering Strike only if your disease is about to drop and Outbreak is not up yet. So you do have that outbreak window because you do not want to keep reapplying diseases manually. But outside of that, you don't actually use Festering Strikes on with Unholy Runes, as Waves just said. It is not worth prioritizing Festering Strikes to keep up diseases in a regular situation. Of course, it depends on the fight, and it is totally your call if you want to do that and snapshot, and then keep up those snapshot diseases a little bit longer, so you could spread diseases, etc. It is up to you, but in general, the answer is no. You don't want to prioritize Festering Strikes over all.
Yeah, the only exception to that, which Liv just put down, is Heroic Nefarian. Because if you get 100% stolen power, and we just so people who maybe are not quite aware of what we're talking about when we say snapshot or diseases. So a new ability, which you can see right here, called Outbreak. And you can also snapshot your diseases with Icy Touch and Plague Strike. But Outbreak allows you to instantly apply Blood Plague and Frost Fever. And what it does is it snapshots your strength, crit, I mentioned this earlier, and damage percentage onto that enemy. And what Festering Strike does, in addition to converting your runes, it also increases the duration of your diseases by 6 seconds. The idea being that with your talents in looking back at this, with your epidemic talent, you get to 33 seconds. You should be able to use Festering Strike enough to get to that minute mark where you can then reapply your outbreak. Now, what Fonzus was referring to is the fact that, okay, let's say I get a really awesome snapshot on my diseases at the beginning of the fight. And I would highly suggest the Murfin's, maybe you can go find it, Liv, Murfin's Snapshotter of diseases. It's a great weak aura that tells you the DPS change. But a lot of people think like, hey, maybe I should keep this awesome snapshot going. And the answer is absolutely not. The difference in damage between Festering Strike and Scourge Strike is actually quite large. Plus, Festering Strike is using 2 runes. So if you use a Festering Strike on 2 death runes, that's giving up 2 Scourge Strikes that already do more damage than 1 Festering Strike. You're losing way, way more damage by keeping those diseases up than just reapplying. And the like I said, the alternative to that is if you're on Nefarian and you get 150% stolen power, you then snapshot that onto Nefarian, then you do want to keep that rolling to the end of the fight. That's the only fight, though, where there's a difference. And then let's just talk. We already talked a lot about Dark Transformation. And then there's some stuff being said in the chat about this. The other thing that you use your RP for, of course, is to try to keep your Dark Transformation up. You're trying to, of course, fish for those procs, but then when Dark Transformation is about to come off, you want to try it. I mean, you have to strike a bit of a balance in that you don't want to not use any abilities or not use any runic power at all just so that you can get to a full bar. Because then you could end up in a situation where you run out of runes and you're just sitting there waiting, no runes, waiting for your Dark Transformation to drop so that you can, get 3 in a row. And that kind of feast and famine mentality ends up being a DPS loss. So it's not an easy thing to do. You have to practice managing that. And then this is also where your AMS becomes your best friend. If you're able to use your AMS effectively, you don't need to pool any RP because you can just save your AMS for right when you're about to get your Dark Transformation again, and then just use AMS, blast out 5 death coils, just like that. So you're working around those abilities. You want to be doing Death and Decay on cooldown. It ends up being the highest damage per rune ability because you get tons of damage from it. It's only every 30 seconds, but you want to make sure you're doing that on cooldown, even on single target. Um,
Just
and that's
quickly,
your main.
sorry.
Yeah,
Is there a way to track the actual cooldown of Death and Decay? Because whenever I've ever tried to make a weak aura for it, it says that it isn't available, because obviously sometimes I don't necessarily have a rune for it, but even though it is available, if you know what I mean.
yeah. I've got one that I made. I can share it with you.
That'd be
Um,
amazing.
yeah, what mine does basically is uh, it disappears while the 30 seconds is going down. And then as soon as it gets to about 3 seconds left on the cooldown, it pops up, the button pops up, it makes a sound, and then it glows once it's actually available. And it sits there glowing until I press it again.
That'd be good. But yeah, carry on, sorry.
Yeah, I can message that to you. And then Vopak. I've never said your name out loud. Vopakak. Vopakak. Sorry, man. Maybe just Vope or Vop. Vopi. Is that Vopi? Did I say that right? Sorry, I'm reading the chat for anyone who's in YouTube, thinking like I'm having a seizure or something. Um, One little nuance that this is very true. We do, in some circumstances, use our blood boil and fights like with Maloriak on heroic with the swills or at the beginning of Halphus. You do not ever want to use your blood boil on blood runes. You only want to use them on death runes. The reason is you don't want to end up in a situation where you have two frost runes just sitting there that you're not able to use. Because the only ability that we use our frost runes for is Icy Touch at the very beginning. You do when you're running in your opener, you use Icy Touch and you use Plague Strike to start out, um, get your diseases rolling before you then get your procs and then you use Outbreak. But other than that, the only other thing we use is Festering Strike. But in order to use Festering Strike, you have to have another Blood Rune. So if you have an orphaned Frost Rune, that's a really bad situation.
Do you never use a
Uh,
blood strike in the opener? Because
Never.
to get the death rune? No.
No. No. It's way better in that case in the opener to use your blood tap in the beginning.
Right.
And then after you use your blood tap, you really shouldn't run into that situation. Another thing I would point out, this goes back to just the whole idea of rune management. Sometimes people will see a death rune and like maybe one of their frost runes is currently a death rune, okay? And then they have a blood rune or sorry, let me set the stage for this. Both of your frost runes are death runes. So you've got two death runes, and then you have a blood rune, and then a blood rune is recharging. I don't know if hopefully I'm describing that right for people to visualize. In this situation, a lot of people are very tempted to use a festering strike. Don't do that. It is okay to have a blood rune that's just sitting there as long as another blood rune is also recharging. The situation where you would want to do a festering strike with a death rune is if both of your frost runes are both death runes, and then you have two blood runes. In that situation, yes, you want to use a festering strike. The name of the game, just like in Wrath, is you do not want rune drift. You always want your runes to be recharging. And it's okay to have a blood rune just sitting there as long as there's another blood rune that's recharging.
So that's a
Hopefully
core
that.
mechanic right there, as
Yeah.
we've said. It's like it applies the same for all three specs, right? So as long like your first priority is to get one of each rune regenerating, and then the moment you spend the second rune, it will just wait for that first rune to fully regenerate before this second rune regenerates. So you'd have no rush spending that rune whatsoever. So you just you spend when it's appropriate to spend, but you don't actually rush to spend that.
Yeah. I think a couple other things I'd just like to point out before I finish with Gary. Um, so there's a couple of other abilities that we get. I just want to run through them very quickly. So you can see them right here on my screen. Dark Simulacrum. So this is mainly a PvP spell. However, there are a couple of fights in the game that you can use it on. Apparently, you can use it on Ragnaros. Not going to get into that, but don't worry about it for this tier. Maybe we'll talk about it next tier. Necrotic Strike, again, another PvP ability. It basically prevents healing. It's not anything we really need to worry about.
Does
And
the
then
cast
Dreadblade.
time effect not work on bosses at all?
I don't. I mean, it does, but I don't think it's something that we should waste our abilities on, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Using Necrotic Strike, which is an unholy rune, is a massive DPS loss because you're using it instead of a Scourge Strike. Yeah. And then just to kind of finish off on our mastery. So for Unholy, unlike Frost, our mastery it's okay, but the other stats are better for us. So we get shadow damage from our mastery. And then, 2.5% per point of mastery. That does affect our plague, blood plague, which is shadow damage. It also affects our Scourge Strike. So our Scourge Strike does a portion of its damage as shadow, and so we do get that benefit. It's not better than crit or haste though. Until you get Girthalak in Dragon Soul. The Girthalak proc does all shadow damage and it scales with your mastery and it does a ton of damage. I mean, I think on the private server, my character is in like 378 gear, and I have Girthalak, and it's doing between 75 and 100k per proc. And there's no ICD on it. So there have been times when I've gotten two procs at the same time, and it scales massively off mastery. That's why mastery becomes better for us in Dragon Soul, but we don't really deal with it before then. And then I think the last thing I wanted to talk about was just Gary, our gargoyle.
Yeah.
So Gary is different in Cataclysm. He has decided that he doesn't like attacking as fast as he did in Wrath. He's just over it. And so Gary is GCD capped. That basically means he does 18 attacks total, no matter how much haste that you have. So even though he does, I keep saying even though your gargoyle does snapshot both your haste and your strength, your attack power, your haste doesn't really matter. So you don't need to play around like having, oh, I'm in lust, so I should use my gargoyle. No, you don't need to worry about that. What you do need to worry about is just your strength procs. Um, you're only going to be able to do 18 attacks, period, no matter how much haste you have. with the exception, here's a little tidbit of information for parsing. If you do your Gary right before the phase 2 to phase 3 change on Alakir, it stops the server time, but Gary keeps casting. So you can end up getting like 26 or 27 casts off on Alakir, which is kind of neat. Who knows if Blizzard will actually fix that? So
One huge thing to comment is that dark transformation is dynamic. So your pet
yeah,
gets all your buffs and all your strength, etc. But as they fade, the pet gets less strength and less haste, etc. But Gargoyle, on the other hand, it's a snapshot. So you don't actually have to worry about uptime of those procs on Gargoyle. As soon as you cast it, it's snapshot and then GG's, right? So
yeah,
what you technically want to do is send Dark Transformation with Unholy Frenzy with everything you've got, like trinkets, everything you got, right? And then before those procs and before you lose any attack power or any buffs at all, you send Gargoyle, right? So you get the uptime, the full uptime and full duration of those buffs for Dark Transformation, and before they expire, you send Gargoyle. If that's the case, right? If that's the situation in the fight, so you send Gargoyle, so it snapshots those buffs and not technically benefiting from the duration of that they have. So as long as you send it before they expire, you're good.
yeah. Sometimes that ends up with you sending Gargoyle before Dark Transformation at the beginning of a fight, and of course it's very fight specific. Like on Magma, you're gonna save your Gargoyle until you get the exposed head, for instance. And then if you have, like, for instance, a pre-pull Dark Transformation, which we haven't really talked about that's a whole nother can of worms. Um, but if you already have all of that, or you already have, some stacks going into the fight, you can then do your DT first. Um, the thing with Dark Transformation at the beginning is if you're lusting on pull, you do want to try to get that Dark Transformation out in under 10 seconds because it lasts for 30 seconds and you get a massive jump in damage if you can match up your Dark Transformation with a full 30 seconds of lust and Unholy Frenzy.
So you want to pre-pull with max runic power if you can.
If you can, yeah. And the nice thing is our T12 2 set piece bonus is going to help with that. Um, it will allow us to generate runic power outside of combat. It's not going to allow us to get to a full bar, but it will allow us to maintain our current runic power.
Right.
At least that's how it works on the private servers.
I think we've covered everything there. There was one. Oh yeah, there was one very weird question I wanted to ask. About, like, obviously proc trinket and a on use trinket. Is there any an area where you would ever use that scenario? Like you wait for your one trinket to proc, then you pop your on use trinket just to snapshot that with a gargoyle.
Yeah, so you would definitely want to, if you have an on use trinket, um, it's definitely going to get more use out of your gargoyle. Because let's say it's a 10-second, it lasts for 10 seconds. Getting 10 seconds on a souped up DT, sure, that's really nice. But it's even more worthwhile on your gargoyle. It's going to get the full benefit out of it. The problem is you cannot stack on use trinkets with synapse springs. And as it just so happens, all of our best trinkets in the game, all the way till the end, are basically not on use trinkets. So if you do have an on use trinket, yeah, you should save it for Gargoyle. Um, but luckily, we don't really have to deal with that when we get our best trinkets in each phase.
And should you obviously you should you line up trinket strength procs of dark transformation as well, if you can.
Yes, if you can, because he definitely benefits from that. Um, but they are of way more use to your gargoyle. So, like in the DK analyzer, as I've been doing a lot of analysis of like dark transformations versus gargoyles and whatnot, these strength procs definitely boost your DT, but it's nowhere near how much they boost your gargoyle. So if you have to choose between the two for some reason, you want those trinket procs to be for your diseases and for your gargoyle over, you know, matching it up with your DT. If you can get the DT, I mean that is obviously min-maxing, but the gargoyle is you're getting much more benefit from the gargoyle using them.
Like, how long should you wait? Say you're in a scenario like obviously when you're like pooling runic power before DT falling off, or maybe you could explain just like what is like the perfect procedure on doing that, so that you don't waste damage.
Yeah, so this is what makes Unholy so hard because it's a very it differs depending on how many runes you currently have, you know, if you have, we haven't even talked about ERW, empowered rune
Oh
weapon,
yeah.
um which is better off used as a oh no type ability when you're like out of runes completely. Um Rather than in the opener. It really kind of depends on the fight and your situation. But in general, like I have a weak aura that like my runic power bar is always blue. But when dark transformation is about 9 seconds from dropping, the bar turns red. And that's like a visual reminder to me, like, okay, start thinking about pooling your runic power. And so it's about at 9 seconds that I kind of take stock of how many runes I have. And if I'm almost completely out of runes, then I may want to try to fish for a runic corruption proc. If it looks like I've got quite a few runes and I'm doing okay, then I might start pooling some more runic power. And then at about 5 seconds, is when if I get a sudden doom proc, I hold on to it. If I get a sudden doom proc at like 8 seconds, I use it because I probably want that runic corruption proc to happen. So, because that gives me more runes to be able to spend and get more runic power to then get into my dark transformation faster. And then all of this is moot if I know I have AMS available and there's a mechanic I can take advantage of to use AMS and thus get a full bar. Like if I'm a Nefarian and a crackle is about to happen, I don't have to worry about pooling at all. I can just be sending and I can hit AMS with, AMZ and get a full bar right there. So this is why Unholy is very difficult because there's not an easy answer to that question.
Yeah. Have you got like a list of all those like AMS mechanic situations that you can take advantage of, like anywhere where it's written down?
We
Yeah,
do have that list, and we did create. There was Kepler. He created for us the AMS when Mikora. That is a somewhat aggressive reminder of when to use AMS before the damage actually happens. So it is all fine tuned to T11. So for the tier we are currently in. So you should be able to pop and to see AMS reminders on your screen before the damage happens. So you dump and then you AMS and get the full bar again.
Yeah, well,
yeah.
I appreciate a link. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, I share it in the chat. I'll send it again.
And I think the last cooldown is Army of the Dead. You know what's the procedure with that?
Oh
Just
yeah,
pre-pull.
almost forgot about that. Yeah, it's pre-poll in every situation except for council, which here's
Oh yeah.
some pretty cheeky army tech. Um,
It still
so in
snapshots,
general,
doesn't it? I know, and well, I noticed it did. Don't know if it was. It should
it
have been.
does it does still snapshot. It's just not as useful anymore to waste that time on, using it during the fight. We just want to use it in pre-poll. It does about 100k damage. The only fight that you want to use it outside of pre-poll. Now, there's some fights that you don't want to use it at all in the beginning. But for council, and this is heroic council, you can actually have every single one of your individual armies or like ghouls, part of army, get the frost buff, the one that gets spread to everyone. And if you save your army for about 10, I usually do about 10 seconds. It's kind of feels craft. I mean, it's a lot of RNG depending on who gets the frost buff and when they run it over and spread it. But if you wait about 10 seconds, your army of the dead, I think not last week. Last week it didn't work out for me, but 2 weeks ago I got a 1.3 million army of the dead on council because I
Wow.
waited about 12 seconds to cast army.
I mean, did that count on Warcraft logs though?
Oh yeah,
Christ.
it counts. Not very many people know that, so here's an exclusive for everyone out there. Um, Not very many people know that. You just have to look at the logs, and if you look at the top of the logs, there's a couple of people who have figured it out. Um, but yeah, it works. If and you can actually see this if you go, any of you right now, if you go to your logs right now, even with your pre-poll army, you'll see that your army on council did about 500 to 600k damage. And that's because it was already there getting that frost buff, but it only lasted for another like 15 seconds. The reason why it's 1.3 million is if you delay it and then you cast it, then hopefully your army is getting the full duration of its life with that buff.
So speaking of like other tricks like that, I was wondering, is it ever worth to just before Nefarian flies up, is it ever worth like just trying to squeeze in a couple of festering strikes to get the dots lasting longer on him? Is that ever worth it?
I mean, it would be. It's really up to your raid because it's far worse to get a crackle, you know, during P2, especially on heroic. Um, so I mean, I would say listen to your raid leader on that. I mean, usually I do reapply my diseases, and then it also depends if you're on heroic, if you've gotten the Dominion before, and so you have stolen power. Um, you know, uh, the for instance with Atramedes, usually what you want to do is when he's transitioning into phase 2, you want to hit him with an icy touch and a plague strike, to start those diseases going, and then as they're about to fall off you do an outbreak, and then that allows you to get a full diseases for the whole time that he's in the air, because I think it's 45 seconds.
Yeah, another thing I've noticed on Warcraft logs is people using crushing weight trinket. What on earth's going on there? Is that some crazy Chinese tech we don't know about yet,
No,
or
so no, so I'm a recent convert to the crushing weight. I guess you could say. So yeah, the two main trinkets that people debate on is Heart of Solace, of course, versus Crushing Weight. And Heart of Solace is awesome. The problem is it has a terrible proc rate. And the reason why, if you go into The Sims, that it looks like many times Heart of Solace is better than Crushing Weight is because The Sims are just averaging everything. And if you could get Crushing Weight and Heart of Rage to match up 100% of the time, then yeah, Heart of Solace would be better. The problem is the proc rate is so terrible. Sometimes they don't line up, and it's really difficult that way. The great thing about Crushing Weight is not so much that, um, I mean, you do get that really good strength stat bonus. It's like plus 321, I think, for the heroic. But the haste proc is pretty regular, and it almost always matches up with your dark transformation. And what I found is that it also is super helpful in the beginning of the fight to getting your first dark transformation, because that haste proc helps your rune regeneration rate. And so I have found that it just like playing with it just makes my rotation better. It makes it easier to get my dark transformation. It usually matches up with my dark transformation because it's on a 1 minute cooldown. And so it's usually kind of always matching up with my dark transformation each time. And so for me, it's really not that big of a difference in terms of DPS loss or gain. It's a lot less stressful to only have to worry about the rage proc with Gary versus both of those procs. And yeah, it matches up with Dark Transformation. So I have started using it because for me personally, it seems like it's a DPS upgrade. Um, if you're trying to get that second proc and you end up like me tunneling, like, you know, you're like, oh my gosh, my pre-pot is about to fall off. Why isn't Heart of Solace procking? And I have found that I would start to tunnel towards worrying about those procs. And that ends up being a DPS loss. And then the other thing too is you just in the beginning, if you get that Crushing Weight, then you have a better chance of getting more procs off, like getting your rage faster. And then it also ends up giving you more sudden dooms because you're doing more main hand attacks. So there's all of this stuff around why Crushing Weight, in my opinion, ends up being better. But they're very close. I mean, I think, you know, both are really good. I see in the chat someone saying like, how do we feel about licensed slay in place of Heart of Rage? Absolutely not. Rage is awesome because of the massive strength proc. At least the heroic one. I'll say that.
Just a quick, I don't know, addendum. We do have the next action guide, right? So it does tell you a lot of those small things when it comes to when to pull and when not to pull RP, how to optimize dark transformation at time and when to cast outbreak, etc., etc. But it doesn't mean you have to follow it 100%. For Unholy, you do need to know what you are doing, and you do need to know and understand your class and the and how to actually use the spells. Do not account and do not use the next action guide for Unholy purely counting on it, because most of the spells like Dark Transformation itself, Gargoyle, and the big cooldowns you are managing by yourself. We only have reminders there. We are not actually telling you to use it on this particular gap. That's not how it works, right? So you do need to understand of the fight, and you do need to understand about your cooldowns and when to use them and in which order. But when it comes to the rest, like when to use Curse Strike, when to use Festering Strike, when to dump, and when not to dump, runic power, etc., it does a pretty decent job for you. and we do try to min-max that to the best of our extent. But when it comes to big GCDs, it's on you, right?
Yep, absolutely. Definitely check out the next action guide. It's quite helpful.
Other than that, I mean, we've covered it pretty well. Unholy. I mean, the only last little question I've got on here is, is it ever worth it to use huddle to keep a pet alive? I mean, me personally, my pet's dying quite a lot. Maybe that's just because I'm careless. But is there ever a time where your pet is very, very likely to die and it's worth using huddle?
I don't think so. To be honest, I mean, the times when your pet does die or is at risk of dying, many times you can prevent that. Great example is during phase 2 of Nefarian.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, we could probably spend a whole video talking about how sucky our pet mechanics are on multiple different fights. But
Because
in
he gets stuck
general,
on the way up, doesn't he? It's so annoying. He gets stuck in the lava. But normally, if you
yeah,
just press passive and then pet attack again, he's fine.
yeah, that's what you have to do on Sinestra, for instance, is you don't even attack. You put him on passive or defensive. You run in. When you get in range, then you have him attack Sinestra, and then you attack Sinestra, and then you just keep him on Sinestra the whole time. Otherwise, he's going to bug out. I mean, I don't even think. Basically, it happens to me all the time on Sinestra. Magma's the same way. And the Firelands has a whole bunch of bosses that are like that. They're like in pools of lava sitting there, which are just going to be super annoying for your pets.
Got that to look forward to then.
Yeah. More heartache.
And like
I will.
we are about to change to frost, right? And
Yeah.
Yeah, I
I'd
do
like
have
to
to
surprise
go.
you guys entirely when we talk about Master Frost and how it works and how it behaves and how close it is to Unholy. You guys are going to be surprised if you don't know what it is and to how
I will.
easy it is to get this thing rolling.
I will give one little plug. The DK analyzer, I should be getting it out this week. I think it's going to be a real boon to all of you who play Unholy.
Amazing.
And I'm also going to I'm going to make some videos about it. And then I'm also planning on doing some videos about how to analyze logs in general, like deep dive into how to use Warcraft logs and all the different, ways to use them and different things like that. So I'll be posting some videos all about how to use your logs. I'm a data guy, so this is the type of stuff I love.
Yeah, this is a time for you, Fonzas, to take over. I know nothing about Frost. I thought it was a mage spec,
I'm gonna drop. Hey, thanks, Metagoblin. Thanks, everyone.
No worries.
Thanks, Waves. But yeah, I told you, man. I told you, Meta Goblin. Like you're about to get surprised about how close. Liv, do you have that 99 percentile of how close Frost is to Unholy at the moment? And because, dude, there is like two basic rotations. When you go back um, to how you worked in Wrath of the Lich King, we had pretty much obliterate centered rotation where you don't want to drop diseases and we want to keep them up and you want to maximize the obliterate count. And this is a thing of the past now. Because like Master Frost is taking over and it's as Liv posted there, is really really close to Unholy when he goes to the Bass Frost Death Knights out there, right? And of course, one of the things before I start asking stuff to replicas and start like give the microphone to replicas is that we generally see that Warcraft logs bar pulling Frost Death Knights a little bit down the road you guys have to account that a lot of players do play obliterate, the obliterate build, and some of them like even go two hands, that two-handed weapon, and which is not like the best way to go. And these pulls the bar down, right? When you go to, I wish there was a way to compare only Master Frost people there are actually dual wielding and playing the Master Frost pack, and these should be and like it should pull all the way up the Frost pack, so you guys could, yeah, it'll be more clear how Frost actually behaves. But Replicas, what the hell is Master Frost and how it compares to Obliterate, to the Obliterate pack, and how are they both now? I'll leave you to actually explain it and cover their differences, etc.
Right. So is my
Sorry, what was it?
Mic problems. Yeah, we did hear you for
is it
2
working now?
seconds. Yeah,
Yeah, it is working now.
Okay. So for first you have actually 3 kind of different specs. So you have the two-handed oblit, then you have dual wield oblit, which is, I mean, pretty self-explanatory. And then you have Master First, which is a completely different rotation, which was, I think, in Cataclysm, it was back in Firelink when they actually theory crafted all of the Master First stuff to actually make it work. So Obliterate is pretty much the same as in Wrath. You have your Obliterate, which is your main spender, you have your First Strike, and you have your Rhyme proc, which is just Howling Blast. There are a few changes, but generally you're just using Obliterate like you did back in Wrath. You don't have your Blood Runes anymore. They get converted as a part of the first. But you have Death Runes instead, so you just get more Obliterate instead. Now, for the way that Master Frost plays, it's actually depending on, well, mastery, as in Master Frost, which you use on Howling Blast. So you're actually spamming Howling Blast. Even though it's an AoE spell, it does extremely good damage, and it's only one Frost rune, meaning all of your Death Runes can be spent on Howling Blast as well. And then you have your Unholy, which is essentially just a filler. Keep up Blood Plague, use Obliterate. It's pretty simple.
So the focus changes from Obliterate to Howling Blast, right? So even in single target, so you're always blasting, even though in single target, if there is two plus targets, that's a benefit, a bonus. You're just blasting anyway, the same rotation, right?
Yeah, pretty much. There are a few things you can do for AoE, like using your Death and Decay, but Pestilence is just a no-go, and you're just blasting Howling Blast. There's pretty much nothing else you do in AoE situations. And that's also one of the reasons why it does so well in AoE and Cleave, because it's just your standard rotation, but it's also really good in single target. Like for Chimeran, which Liv posted, it's like 1k DPS behind Unholy, which is nothing, really. But yeah, just aside from the rotation, I'll talk more about the particular min-max you can do a bit later. But let's just go with the basics first. I think that would make more sense. So even though you're still using Unholy Presence, especially as Master Frost, you're actually casting so much that you will get GCD capped without using Unholy Presence. And it's just overall better DPS than Frost in almost every scenario. There's only like 10 plus targets for extended AoE. For the races, it's actually very different from Unholy, because yes, you do use your pets, raise that 3-minute cooldown. It's not the best, but Orc just doesn't buff it enough. Troll is actually so much better for Frost because of the 20% haste, which you do snapshot onto your ghoul. And you snapshot with everything else as well. So Troll is like 1.5% better than all Alliance races or more, and 1% better than Orc. And for Alliance, it's just walking. You need Darklight for the movement speed, and there's nothing else. Like, they all suck, pretty much. So it's a pretty significant change. If you want to really pass, you have to be Horde. It's roughly 400 DPS ahead. For your professions, it's pretty much the same as Unholy. You have Engineering, which is just it's too good to pass up. Synapse Springs. You have your Rocket Boots for the movement that DK really needs. They have nothing else. And then you have your 80 stat professions like jewel crafting, blacksmithing. Waves did talk about that earlier, so not gonna go too much over it. And again, tailoring, just not worth it. Herbalism was brought up once, I believe. It's actually not bad because you snapshot the haste, but it doesn't compete, unfortunately. For your gear, mostly, as Master first, you go for Mastery, then Haste. However, Strength is still such a big factor in your overall DPS that you never really want to miss out on any strength. It's worth one strength is worth more than 2 of any other stat. So the same goes for reforging, for gemming, etc. Where it's pretty much pure strength then mastery. The one change there is in that between Obliterate and Master First, because your Howling Blast is actually a spell, you need to be spell hit capped, which is 17%. However, you are already very close to being spell hit capped just by getting your melee hit cap, which everybody else gets, including First DK. As for your other stats, haste is extremely good for everyone, in particular DK, because it increases your rune regeneration, as well as your attack speed, which gives you more killing machine procs, which makes you crit more, etc. It's really good. But there's no other good stats. That's pretty much it. Crit gets overtaken by killing machine procs, which gives you 100% crit, makes it not very good. Expertise, it's not very good because you just get a refund when you get dodged, so it makes no sense to stack either of those. And the same goes for Obliterate spec. Whereas Obliterate spec focuses on haste primarily, then on crit, then on mastery, and it is mostly haste. You really don't want any other stats than haste. It's simply too important for you. Also, just ask questions.
Too good. You already covered professions. Let me get this up to speed. Races, professions. What about tier PCs and gearing? How much of a difference it is from Master Frost to regular Frost to Unholy? What if we have those Unholy and is wanting to try yeah, Master Frost. How should they migrate, and how different is gearing looking in both situations?
All right, so in terms of gearing, you're actually not replacing a lot. You have the random suffix items from Conclave and Alkea, which you want Mastery Haste. However, the rest, you don't really have much of a choice. You're still stuck with the same weapon, same trinkets, same tier items, same off pieces. So it's pretty much the same gear, except you reforge into Mastery instead of Haste. Meaning,
And you do a wield, right?
yes. So the one big thing that a lot of people are asking is, can you go two-hand? No, you can't. So as Frost, you have a lot of Frost damage, even as a Blitzray spec. And you want to have both Fallen Crusader, which gives you 15% strength, and you want to have Raise Eyes, which is a stacking debuff that gives you 10% extra Frost damage. Meaning you would lose out on 10% extra Frost damage if you go two-hand. It's not viable. Sorry to everybody that wants to do it. So dual wield Obliterate and Master Frost, they're both viable. Dual wield Oblitz obviously lacks a lot in AoE compared to Master Frost, where you buff up your Howling Blast. Since Obliterate doesn't really have many AoE spells, it is not worth casting Blood Boil. It is just barely worth using Pestilence when it's like 8+ targets. So you really don't have many options. And therefore, Obliterate just loses out pretty hard. And two-hand Obliterate, it's not really worth playing. You're griefing yourself by playing that.
Makes sense. From personal experience, when I was trying to understand about Master Frost and trying to play around with that, it is like we said, like a Holding Blast centered rotation, right? So correct me if I'm wrong, but all you care about is pumping and getting those Holding Blasts out, and you do need your diseases, right? So you do sand. The good thing is that Howling Blast applies Frost Fever, and then you have only to worry about the Blood Plague. But yeah, send those Howling Blasts, and then you see what to do with those extra unholy runes later. If Blood Plague is that it's not applied, you apply it. If you do have two unholy runes, or yeah, if you're about to get to unholy runes, you don't want to sit on both, so you sometimes weave in some obliterates too, so to get those unholy runes to consume themselves. And as we mentioned before, like the core mechanic as it works for the other specs, Unholy gets a talent that the runes regenerate faster if it procs, right? So the same proc exists for the other two specs, but the whole a random depleted rune gets regenerated instantly. So what you want to do, like, as both your blood runes will be already if you're frost, like both your blood runes will be already death runes. So you do have two frost and two death runes 100% up the time, so you could technically pump four howling blast right there. But as I was mentioning, like, you do want to have those two types of runes depleted, at least one of them depleted the entire time, so that when you have a random proc from Frost Strike, like from consuming runic power, you do favor those runes to be refreshed, not unholy. So that's why you do not want to expand. Technically, you do not want to spend both unholy runes. You do not want to sit on both, because that's wasting a rune, but you want to manage that unholy rune and in a way that you favor that proc chance to be like the probability to that proc chance to refresh one of those runes, you could get another Howling Blast off. Does that make sense? And like the biggest difference that I see is that it's simple. It is pretty much straightforward. Your Pillar of Frost only has 1 minute cooldown, which is your biggest burst. So you're sending all the time. You're just pumping. You're just sending, blasting everything all the time, and you're just having fun. It's way easier than trying to manage pair of rooms for obliterate, for instance, and then trying uh, to do all the Mimax that we talked about on the when it comes to Unholy. So if you're trying Death Knight, definitely try Master Frost. You won't regret it. It's super easy and it's super fun, especially for beginners, right? So it is really good to just get in there and start blasting and pumping all the way. And as the difference I said before is, remember when I said that the next action guide, you need to actually understand the class. You need to actually, yeah, know your cooldowns and know your stuff when you are playing Unholy, because it depends. It depends a lot on everything, right? For Frost, especially for Master Frost, you get less things to worry about, right? You do have your goal. You do want to snapshot your goal because you do not have a permanent goal. It stays up there for a fixed amount of time, and it does snapshot. It is not dynamic as it is in Unholy. And you do need to somewhat min-max that, and perhaps shift a little bit your Pillar of Frost a little bit to the left or to the right, or postpone it a little bit to get like blasting in a specific moment of the fight. But it's nothing compared to what you do in Unholy, right? To the things you have to min-max in Unholy. So it is, yeah. Again, super fun. It surprised me, and I recommend everyone to try it. And as opposed it is to Unholy, you just install the next action guide, and you are pretty much all set. Just go, just blast, and yeah, of course, you do have to understand of the fights. You do have to shift a little bit your cooldowns depending on the situation, but in general, replicas helped me polish Master Frost, and you just blast, man. You just go, you're just there, just pumping.
Yeah, as Francis said, like right away when you get into it, you're blasting. Like you have very high base damage. You don't scale quite as well. You do scale decently because you both have strength and mastery as your damage multipliers, but you really do pump right off the bat. And high end, you're competing with Unholy DK. On single target, on multi target, you're beating them. So it is really strong, and there is a lot of min-max you can get into with when to use your Unholy runes, how to spend your runic power to maximize, for example, using your runic empowerment, which has a chance to give you full rune back, when to use that, how to maximize it, and so on, which it does make it a little tricky to play it correctly, but it is extremely simple. Like the baseline, spend your runes on Howling Blast, make sure you don't overcap, and make sure you spend your one Unholy rune, not both. That's pretty much it. And it does actually scale really well, going into Firelands and going into Dragon Soul. In fact, there's a neat little thing you can do in Firelands that I don't think many people have seen yet, but you actually go for 2 set tank piece. What it does is it applies a debuff on your target. It does like 800 damage every 2 seconds, but makes it so that it counts for both of your diseases being up. So you never use Plague Strike anymore, you just use Obliterate. Making it even simpler, but it's actually a very big DPS increase. Because right now, the only reason you're using Plague Strike is to put up your Blood Plague, so your Obliterate does more damage. Whereas with the two sets, you just use more Obliterate, which gives you more Rhyme procs, it does more damage. More Rhyme procs, meaning more Howling Blast, meaning more Runic Power. So that's a neat little thing about Firelands tier, which I think it's only Frost that takes advantage of that.
I suppose like
That's
one
great.
big question that people are going to have is how all the Death Knight specs going to scale into future phases of Cataclysm. Like what's going to drop off, what's going to get better.
Right. So the one thing I think Waves mentioned it a little bit, but it doesn't. Unholy doesn't actually scale too well. Right now they're very snapshot heavy, but going forward, you don't have the big strength proc trinket like you do now. You have Solace, Half Rage, whereas in Firelands you don't actually have strength proc trinkets at all. I believe you're keeping Half Rage, but your second trinket is now strength proc, which kind of ruins all the snapshotting a bit. Whereas for Master Frost, yes, you are snapshotting and you have Pillar Frost, which is a straight up strength multiplier, as well as Unholy Strength. But it doesn't fall off quite as hard. But it will get overtaken by, I believe Warrior is the only melee that will overtake it. I'm not entirely sure about that, but I think it is. Both Unholy and Frost. But we're still very, very competitive. We still do really good damage. Rogue is still a little bit behind in fire lanes, according to what people have been saying. And Retri is not close, not yet. So it doesn't really fall off. You could just say that Arms gets better and Unholy gets a little bit worse when you compare them to current standings. And in Dragon Soul, it is we don't really know yet.
Yeah,
We all think that Arms is better, but it's so far away. And so the main problem when you try to predict for future content is you're actually looking at what happened back in the day, but we're not playing on the same version. Like Unholy has 25% strength from as a passive just from being Unholy, which they did not have back then. It was actually incremental from 5 to 15, 20, so on. I don't remember the exact order, but it was incremental, so they were actually not all that strong back then. Oh, and there were like a ton of changes for Frost, in particular Master Frost, with your Hung Blast. It had so many changes back in Cataclysm. Luckily, we ended on a patch where Master Frost is actually really strong, and it scales really well into laser phases, just not as much as Warrior.
Is there anything else that we need to talk about for Master Frost?
Yeah, Master Frost is actually dependent on glyph. You need a specific set of glyphs because you need Howling Blast to apply Frost Fever, right? But I believe that's the same for regular Frost or Bleed Frost, right, Replicas?
You can, but you don't have to. So right now you have Glyph of Howling Blast. It applies your Frost Fever like Ice Touch would. However, Howling Blast is AoE, so you can AoE apply your Frost Fever at 100% damage, unlike Pestilence, which is only at 50%, meaning you really want it as Master Frost, but as a Blitz, it is less important In fact, you mostly want to use Untitled Touch instead, which increases your first fever damage. Or you can use Glyph of Raise Dead, which is just increases your ghoul damage. It's actually the best setup for Obliterate on single target right now. It's just using First Strike, Glyph of First Strike, Glyph of Obliterate, and Glyph of Raise Dead. Because your ghoul actually does quite good damage, especially if you snapshot it. Which, as Francis mentioned earlier, it's a full snapshot. It's not a dynamic update, so you can get everything proccing on it, including Lust, and it will keep that for the full minute, which makes snapshotting all the more important for your race dead.
And another thing, I remember back in Wrath, we caring a lot about when to actually summon Ghoul, because different from Unholies, that I had back then, like, I don't remember the talent, but there is a talent to reduce the damage the pet takes, and this talent is not available for Frost. So your pet does take a lot of damage. How does it feel for you? Do you even worry about like when to summon it, if there is going to be an AoE effect that will kill it, and if the pet is going to survive or not the whole duration, etc.? Is that a thing on Cataclysm?
Unfortunately, no. It does suck that it can die from random mechanics, but unfortunately, it is just so much better to snapshot it. If you can snapshot with Pillar of Frost, Crusader, Double Trinkets, Berserking from Troll, or Lust, like you can buff it up to about 120% extra damage. So even if it has half the duration, it's still better. And it, of course, puts it on cooldown, so you can use it again in the fight. There's like 2 or 3 fights where you can't use it twice. Depends a bit on your kill time, but usually you get off 2 uses. It's not like with Elemental Shaman, where if your fire elemental dies, you're screwed. Like, to put it lightly, it carries you. Does like 20% of your damage. It's not the same for Frost. It's about 5%, a bit less. 3 to 5%, depending on how well you snapshot it and if it has full uptime, how long the fight is, so on. But that is still a lot of DPS. That's like 1 to 1.5k DPS overall.
Yeah, so you don't actually mind that too much.
No. If it dies on some fights, it sucks, but you can't micromanage it. You can't actually do anything with it. You don't have a pet bar. Unlike what's it called, Unholy, where you can actually move it around if you want to. But if it dies, it dies. It doesn't die on many fights, and it is RNG if it dies. So no point worrying about it.
Yeah, it is what it is then. Cool. Do you have any other questions, Method Goblin?
Well, the last thing we got written down is, boss specific advice. That'd be the last thing to cover, I would say.
Right. So I've actually made like almost a full guide covering all of this, including a lot of boss specific things, because you have so many things you can do on certain bosses. You also have a few bugs that are rather annoying, but yeah, it is what it is. So one big one that is asked every single day is Magmore. You will definitely 100% suffer on Magmore because you cannot use Howling Blast on the exposed head. It's a bug. You can't use it. Well, you can use it, just doesn't do damage. It's not fixed, it's reported as a bug, but I think they're busy on Season of Discovery right now. Other than that, you have a few bosses where you really want to get your AoE out, like Maloriac, where you want to stack your cooldowns as much as possible. Meaning your Pillar Thrust, which is 20% strength if you're using an unused trinket, like Impatience of Youth. You definitely want to stack with that on the AoE, including Empower Rune Weapon to get a full refresh. And you want to save up your runes for that, because it is so impactful on Master Frost. There's also a few things that are more Master Frost specific than anything, like how to properly spread your diseases or your frost fever. Howling Blast is not a full out AoE, it's a really weird one. It targets something and from there it branches out, but it does not go behind you. Like on Halfos, you want everything in front of you. Howling Blast will hit everything if it's in front of you. If something is behind you, it will not hit it, even if it's within range of Howling Blast. I don't know if it's a bug or what it is, but it's a feature right now. It's also not a 180. It's a weird spell, really weird spell. More like a cone, yes. On Twin Dragons, what some people have been doing is they pull both dragons at the same time. So the one dragon, I think it's Valiona, walks down the stairs a bit, and you can cleave onto it. That includes Master Frost. Howling Blast will definitely cleave onto it then, and you will do absolutely crazy damage on that fight as Master Frost if the raid does that, which they should do since you can combust and everything on it. For Sinestra, as Master Frost, you're actually GST capping insanely hard on Sinestra. So you're using Obliterate during the last phase. So you're essentially just spamming Obliterate and Frost Strike to get to spend your RP and get back some runes. And you have like 60% crit rate on both of them because you attack so fast, so you get so many killing machine procs, so you crit so much with both of them. It's actually pretty neat. And then you of course have the whelps that you can AoE from range, which I think is removed from Warcraft logs now, but you definitely do very good damage on that fight. I don't think there's anything else that's like super Master Frost specific, more than just general pull specific, if the raid does a specific strategy.
Yeah, definitely. What I feel is there is some stuff we may tweak, but it's way less than Unholy, right? Because like the only thing you're tweaking or the only thing you're managing is your burst cooldowns and your goal when you summon a goal, and that's pretty much it. Like even if you mess something up, it's not. Yeah, it's going to screw you up, but you are still going to do a decent chunk of damage, regardless. Because like it's not such a big deal as it is for Unholy. That's what I mean.
Oh yes, definitely. Like if you screw up your big cooldowns as Unholy, you're losing so much more DPS. Whereas if you, I don't know, rune cap or RP cap on Master Frost, it's not good, but you don't lose like an entire 300k damage on your pet or something like that. Even on your race that you lose like at most 150k damage, which you don't really lose it because you have Pillar First is a 20-second aura with a 1 minute cooldown. You shouldn't lose that. So there's not really much to mess up as Master Frost when it comes to that.
Sounds good. Another thing to pay attention to is what Leaf just drawn on paint for us. Is that Howling Blast is a cone, right? And your targeting really matters. And which target, like when you apply in AoE and when you are AoEing, which target you select actually matters because of that cone, right?
It's a cone, but it's not a cone like with
Super
Cone of
time.
Cold, for example. Anything in front of you that is within the range, 10 yards, of Howling Blast will get hit by Howling Blast as long as it's in front of you. If it's behind you, but it's 8 yards away from the Howling Blast target, it will not get hit if it's behind you. If it's in front of you, everything will get hit as long as it's within range of Howling Blast. It's a really weird spell.
Sounds good then. One less thing to worry about. Yeah, I think that was everything, Meta Goblin. Do you have anything else?
No, we don't have anything else written down. I mean, you should probably just move on to more specific questions from the chat for a little bit.
Yeah, sounds good. Do you guys have any questions? For those of you on Discord, you may request to speak as well.
Could also do with somewhere where all the links that we've mentioned. That would be useful. How is this for guide? Bookmark this.
So I posted the docs for Frost DK on Discord. I don't know if anyone can post it in your stream as well.
Yeah, will do. Oh shit, that's the wrong link.
It has detailed descriptions of which specs to use, rather which talents to use, glyphs to use, rotations, what's the difference between Obliterate and Master First, cooldowns, how to properly use them, and so on. Violence 2-piece is indeed worth for First. It's actually, in theory, your best in slot. We can't actually sim for it yet, but in theory it is. When you use gloves and legs as the tank pieces, and then you use your head and shoulder as the DPS pieces, and off piece is your chest.
Yeah, we got a cool question. How do you analyze and how do you check how good a Master Frost is, and what uptimes do you need to check, and what damage do you need to check on the Warcraft logs?
So on Warcraft logs, unfortunately for DK, it does not show your runes. So you can't actually see if, in particular for Frost, if you had runic empowerment proc. So you can't check if you actually got more runes than, you know, the standard refresh rate. But generally, you want to be the most basic thing that a lot of people mess up on is when to use Obliterate and how much to use it. On normal fights, patchwork fight like Chimeron, you're generally looking at around 10 to 12% of your total DPS being from Obliterate, which is almost nothing, but it is your filler spell. It is how you spend your unholy runes. Other than that, you just look at cooldowns. Are you properly stacking for your raise dead? Are you stacking your potion with pillar, for example, since it's a strength percent multiplier? And are you actually using your blood tap? You have a 30-second cooldown on blood tap, which is just a free howling blast, which you always want to be spending. you know one lizard. Unless if your death rune is about to come off cooldown, then you want to wait.
Sounds good. Anything else from the chat? So Metagoblin, you are sharing this, the whole thing, or making a video out of this with a summary or anything in particular?
Both basically. I'll leave this VOD totally live for people. Even if YouTube
Amazing.
doesn't publish it, I'll post a link so everyone can still see it. Everyone can watch it back. Yeah, I apologise. It's very scuffed. I've not streamed for like, I don't think I've even streamed this year. I don't stream anymore. And everything's changed. Like OBS has changed, YouTube's changed. Like it was very confusing. So, but everything, all the information and the voice and everything is still here for people to listen back on. And I think I am going to turn this into a guide. I'm tempted this week. Did you also want to plug the next action guide as well?
Sorry, what did you say? Sorry, Metagoblin, I lost you. What did you say about the next action guide?
His mic broke apparently.
Nice, right. Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. Thank you, Joshua. Yeah, that'll be great. Like, it is no news for those watching here, but we are pretty much, we converted the next action guide for the case and all the math included there, plus hundreds of hours of work from Hakizi into an add-on. We are working to get that add-on outside and available on Curse, but that add-on is just math. You don't have nothing. It like as the add-on itself will have nothing. You still need recallers to call the add-on, right? So with the add-on thing, it made really easier. It's still hard because we do need to polish, etc. But it made easier for us to create all the next action guides with the same quality. So we are kind of going crazy. When I say we, like we have like I don't know 8 people helping. One of them is Replicas, and these guys are doing an amazing job and trying to cover as many classes as we can. And like when you plug in the next action guide, DKs come as default, right? So if you are the way it works right now is that when you sub for a core subscription that it starts with $2, and of course you have more options if you like, but yeah, pretty much they all grant access, and it starts, the base subscription is $2. With those $2 you get access to the add-on, of course, and to the next action guide for DKs. And if you want other classes, as we do need more people to work on them, we thought of these fractured subscription model. So each other class is an additional 1.5 USD per month. So you are able to subscribe to those that you want and to apply to those as well. I believe Goblin has a link already, and he should. I don't think I set up your code, but I will soon. But if you enter Metagoblin's account on the subscription that lasts forever, pretty much until like, yeah, as long as you are subscribed, you should get this discount from his link going. But that's it when it comes to plugging in the next action guide. And again, like, keep in mind that it does not mean you are allowed to not understand about the class at all. You do need to understand what you're doing. It is a reminder. It is not like a bot that will do everything for you. And that's 100% automated thing. No, it's not. It is a reminder when to use your spells. It helps a lot. Especially, like, it gives you freedom not to look at too many things all at once. But also, you do need to understand what you're doing and what you're stepping in and how and when to use your stuff. Just wanted to make that clear. And that applies to every class that we are implementing at the moment. But that's all I had to say, to be honest.
Yeah, but can you hear me again?
Yes.
Yeah, the link will just be in the description of this video.
Amazing. Cool. So I believe that's it, right?
Yeah. Just call it a day whenever you want. It's all good.